I'm Sue Gold, president of the San Diego Museum of Art Artists Guild. I want to welcome you to this video where we are featuring the award winners from our spring online exhibition. The Artists Guild is the oldest support council of the San Diego Museum of Art. In fact, in 2015, we were 100 years old. We have a book coming out soon celebrating our centennial. Members of the Artists Guild work in various media. Go to SDMAAG.org. Click on the artist list. You can also click on the artist's name to find out more about the artist and his or her work. The spring exhibition will be beginning on March 1st, 2022, and will run through April 30th, 2022. If you want the link to the show, enroll over exhibitions and a drop-down list will appear. Click on 2022 Spring Exhibition to find the link to the show. The current online exhibition for spring was juried by Jim Dacian. He will tell you a bit about his jurying process and why he chose the winning works. Jim.
Thank you, Sue. It's great to be here with you, and it's an honor to juror this show. It was a really tough show to serve as a juror, and anytime you're working with so many great works of art, it's a tedious process altogether. So what I'd like to do is give you just a brief summary of how I went about doing that as an art critic and as an art historian, and then we'll walk through the honorable mentions and the winners. What I try when I look at a big body of work, and we were looking at hundreds and hundreds of images, and it's even more complicated because it's online, but I look for a diversity of approaches, and this is partially due because there isn't a particular theme that we're trying to honor. Diversity of content. I know whether it's portrait, landscapes, certain types of stylization, realism, abstraction, 3D, 2D. And then I try to be aware of certain things, the quality of the work, the different types of styles, the titles, the descriptions. I want to know what the why is behind a work of art. It can be technically very proficient and interesting, but then where do you go after that? And I suppose the thing I always try to think about when I look at works of art is this something I want to come back to time and time again? If I ask additional questions, will there be more of a conversation that happens? If I find myself having the same conversation with a work of art each time I look at it, I lose interest of it. So that hopefully gives you an idea in terms of sort of the larger questions and things when looking at so many interesting works of art. So we're going to walk through each of the honorable mentions, and we'll first start with Rebecca Noel, who from San Diego, and she did a piece called Space Mountain. And the reason this was selected for an honorable mention is there's so many landscapes in a show like this. But what I liked about this one particularly is how ironic it was. And so while it is a landscape, it's a landscape of a fake mountain, and the one we're all aware of, Space Mountain at Disneyland. And while it is a piece of significant mid-century architecture, I appreciated the way it stood out from the other landscape pieces within the show, that little bit of humor, and even the sky and the way it kind of burst outward, kind of almost the drama that's associated, even with the strokes and the way they were painted. So it's traditional, but that irony and the fakeness, I think, make it interesting, and it stood out from many of the others. Next, Nathan Taves from Columbia City, Indiana, did a piece called Frontal Sun. And when I was looking for a diversity of styles, this is a good example of that. Nathan abstracts the landscape in a rather cubist style, using a lot of sharp angles, almost to the point where the landscape looks somewhat dangerous, folding in on itself at certain points. It's distorted, it's dynamic, but it also has a lot of energy that one couldn't get in the same way if it was painted in, let's say, an Impressionist style where it'd feel very soft and welcoming. It still has enough recognizable elements so that the viewer can walk into it and actually leads through it with the perspective that he uses. But you keep coming back to it as you see that painterly style and a lot of interesting dynamic things happening as it gets closer to the viewer. From there, another honorable mention was Juan Flores from Encinitas, California. And with Juan's piece, it's stylized. It is a beach scene. Even the format of it is a little bit different in that it has a vertical format rather than a horizontal one, which changes the way you engage with the landscape. Often you'll hear in art school, if things are horizontal, that's the first thing you think of is a landscape. It's vertical, you think of a person. And so the landscape is forced into this vertical composition, which again made it quite different from many of the other paintings that were in the competition. But it's not realistic whatsoever. And Juan's developed a stylized language that's consistent throughout, that features beachgoers. You can see the umbrellas, the break of the shore, but even the angled waves as they get further out into the deep sea. It's a unique viewpoint in that it has this aerial view, almost like a satellite. So the orientation of the piece is unique in that way. Again, an unusual angle, and then handled with Juan's own vocabulary. From there, we'll mention the last honorable mention, which is Garrett Demaurist from Palm Springs, California. And Garrett's piece is completely abstract, again, looking for a diversity of styles and approaches. And essentially he has a number of horizontal lines that the colors fade and move into one another. It features different tones of purple, and there's some oranges and pinks in there, and he calls it Friendship Reclaimed. Almost has a Mark Rothko type feel, somewhat mindful, prayerful, meditative. When something's abstract like that, one could see a sunset in it, but again, these are formal elements interacting with each other, and then a title that has a personification associated makes it all the much more interesting. Again, color use, abstraction, and looking through the hundreds of entries into the show, this is another one that stood out on a line as quite different, quite unique, but also saying something that was really fun, as you can imagine how relationships work, whether they are relationships between inanimate objects, nature, or people. So we'll move into the 3 award winners. In third place, Yahaya Yan from Chula Vista, California, did this painting called Skinny Girl. And it's a lone chair sitting what looks like on the outside of a doorway or entry into a residential, or it could be a commercial space. There's enough cropped out of it that you don't know, but what's interesting about it has this background that has bits of graffiti and wear and tear from a city sidewalk. The chair is almost takes on a female persona because of the title, but again, it's an inanimate object, so it doesn't necessarily have a gender. The artist has forced that, but almost to be sitting like a portrait. The chair has a personality, and it contrasts or juxtaposes all the things that are happening around it, almost like it's standing guard of an area, And then it's also highlighted by the different colors, and the yellow against blue really pops as it comes forward, but gives the chair, again, a certain type of personality. It's a chair that's been used, obviously. It has a purpose for where it is. There's a wonderful narrative that starts to unfold as you slowly start to deconstruct the image. In second place, we have Keith Thompson, and he's from Mountain Bark, Alabama. And this one is called Strangers on a Subway. And this particular piece takes a unique viewpoint. So many of the works that you look at that have some sort of landscape or interior viewpoint come from an eye level, the eye level of the artist. And this one is forced to be much lower, a worm's eye perspective of something that would probably be very common. So looking from the ground on the subway, you get a really strong sense of the floor of the subway, and you're looking upward, almost as though we're not there. Oftentimes in a painting, the viewer almost can situate themselves within the context because you can feel your presence within it, or there's an entry point for you. With this, it's so low, it's not a viewpoint that we would typically take, and it becomes incredibly dramatic because of that. And you think of like a really strong film and where how we use lens location and how it changes the story. So these figures on the subway become much bigger, much more important. On top of that, it's a kind of realism, but it's been cleaned up. I've never seen a subway so clean in my life, but it's also the type of style and how the chrome and everything seems to shine with a newness to emphasize the location in which we're looking. Again, a really fun play with a lot of materials and lens angle to create a bit of a mystery of what's happening there. I think of some of the Edward Hopper paintings and how you end up being almost eavesdropping on someone else's story, and that they're totally unaware of you. No one's really looking at you. You kind of hit the side of their face as they're unaware, as we have a glimpse into this scene. And so lastly, it brings us to first place with Hon Towns from New Jersey, South Orange, New Jersey, and his piece entitled Andy Warhol with Skull. And I chose this piece for first place for a few reasons. It's one, it's a really interesting play on art history, and Andy Warhol being one of the most infamous artists of the last century, and in many ways arguably could be considered someone really important, and maybe the most important artist for moving us into this era of postmodernism. But it's also a portrait, and I know portraiture was very popular within this competition, and it's based off a photograph and a portrait of Warhol. And so rather than take on an incredibly realist replication of something that already exists, which so much of portraiture and landscapes do, the artist is super playful. This somewhat serious pose by Warhol becomes animated and kind of funny as this skull is exaggerated, isn't quite balancing the way it should on his head. But also the artist uses an exaggerated and expressionistic brushstroke in language to create a really fun energy between the background and the enigma of an artist that Warhol was. So while contemplating death with a skull, and the size of that very, very large hand as the proportions are played with, it becomes a really, really fun image to pull and tease apart that not only gives us a glimpse into the artist painting it, but a little bit into the humor and seriousness that Warhol was. So there you have it, Sue. That's the rundown of each of those artists. It was such an honor to do this, and it is so very hard to choose. And I realize that every juror comes with their own unique lens, and I certainly have mine. But tried to bring a diversity of artists, but also ones that were saying a variety of different things and interested in a variety of issues and media to work with.
Thank you very much, Jim. We really appreciate all the things you did, and appreciate your jurying the show for us, and thank you very much.
Well, it was an honor, and thanks to all the artists and all the great work they did.
Very good.